Hey guys, welcome back. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me. We are back for day 3 of our Hover Racer online event, broadcasting the training day from Unite Austin. We're going to be looking at our final day of building a anti-gravity racing game. We're using assets from the game Antigraviator, which you can wishlist on Steam now. You can also sign up for their newsletter at antigraviator.com. We've got Mike Cook from the dev team at Cybernetic Walrus here in the chat to answer any questions you have about the production of the game. Thank you for being here, Mike. And I will post some links in the chat where you can go to wishlist the game on Steam and to sign up for the newsletter in a moment. How's my mic sound? Can you guys hear me okay? Loud and clear. Awesome. Thank you, Dakota. Welcome back. Nice to see you guys coming back and joining us again. I'm super excited about the recent news with regard to the announcement of ProBuilder. That ProBuilder is now part of Unity, and the ProBuilder asset is now free on the asset store, so go and grab it. I highly encourage you to do that. Super, super cool piece of tech. The guys who work on it are great guys, and I'm super excited that that's now going to be brought to the wider Unity community. Let me post this in the chat. There we go. We'll put the links in the chat for Antigraviator. Is it a bit low? I could talk a little louder. I can yell in your ears. Yeah, so I encourage you guys to check out ProBuilder. Grab it and take a look. It really adds something that I feel like was missing in Unity for a long time, was tools for level designers, right? Obviously, we had the ability to block out levels with cubes and spheres and stuff, but having some real integrated mesh editing tools. It's obviously not like a full-blown 3D modeling program, but really will allow you to quickly block out environments and stuff without going back and forth. Yeah, super exciting. I linked it in the main chat. If you guys haven't seen it yet, jump over to the blog post there. We just announced that at 5 p.m. tonight. It's loud, says Gideon. Whoa, okay. Maybe just turn down your volume. And yeah, super, super cool. Yes, exactly. Good to see you, Gideon. Yeah, we internally at Unity have been kind of sitting on that news about ProBuilder because we knew it was coming and we were kind of keeping it a secret. So I'm super happy to be able to announce it and talk about it. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be really happy about it. It's a great, great tool. Mike Geig is in the house. He's our trainer who we will be learning from tonight. So we're going to be going through the final third of the material. We've got a little bit more material than we did last time to go through, so I'll probably keep the on-microphone Q&A periods a little bit on the shorter end and try to answer more questions via the chat just so we're not here all night long. And yeah, let me make sure folks on Twitch know that we're over here. Hello, hello. Welcome back, Dennis. Welcome back, Averal, Dakota, Gideon, Sinale. Great to see you all again. We're going to be starting in about 5 minutes. Day 3 of our Hover Racer Training Day broadcast. It's going to be super duper fun. We're just discussing the news that ProBuilder is now free on the asset store. It's been acquired by Unity and will eventually be turned into like a package as part of the whole package manager initiative, which is going to be kind of changing the way that that Unity works in terms of like managing different features. Hey, Domino, welcome back. Philip, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Great to see you again, as always. And I just want to remind you, we've got some great events coming up online. Check those out if you haven't seen them already. I'll put a list of upcoming events. You can see those there. We've got a training on shader graph from the folks in Austria and New Zealand. I think that's John Sietsma. That should be an interesting one. It'll be 5 a.m. my time, so I probably won't be joining. But we're trying that out, having the folks in the kind of Asia time zone do some live streams of their own. And so if that makes sense for you time zone wise, I encourage you to check it out. We've got one on shader graph tomorrow. It's 5 a.m. for me, but might be a better time for you. And then we have one in India, coming from India, on the 19th, on Monday. On Wednesday, we've got Wednesday the 21st, we've got our Getting Started with 2D Game Kits event. Super excited about that release. It's like a complete 2D platformer kit with a bunch of cool editor tools for those of you guys who are a little more advanced. The main content, the core content, is targeted at beginners, kind of like a little bit of like a Mario Maker style thing in the Unity editor. But for those who are more advanced, I really encourage you to check out the editor tools that are provided there. There's a bunch of really cool custom tooling that's made to allow people to do everything without programming. And I think there's some really cool workflow ideas that you guys can learn from. We've also got some user groups coming up in Latin America, Bogota, Colombia on Saturday, February 17th, and Medellin on February 24th. We've got a session on 360 video coming up on February 28th here online in this time slot at 8 p.m. GMT, and some more stuff that we'll be announcing soon, but that should keep you guys busy for the time being. We're going to go live in about 2 minutes. Yep, AndRacer108 Pro Builder has been acquired by Unity, and it is now free, and that includes Pro Builder, Pro Grids, and Polybrush, I believe, and I think there are some plans to bring some of the other features to the integration as well, but no timeline on that. But yeah, it's a really robust feature set, really great tool. Super psyched to be making that part of the free offering for everybody. So yeah, lots of cool tools coming to Unity between Shader Graph, Pro Builder, you know, scriptable render pipelines. There's really a lot of powerful tooling coming for folks. So super excited to announce that. Hey, GM Liquid Media, great to see you. Welcome back. All right, we're going to go live in 1 minute. Pascal Jacob asks, I have a question from last time. Why is the scene always being flagged as changed after play mode exit? That's a good question. I wonder if that could be something to do with Cinemachine, maybe. I'm not sure if Cinemachine is setting the dirty flags on the scene. That's the only thing I could think of because I know it preserves changes from play mode. Patrice Thorez says, pretty sensible thing. If it exists, don't reinvent it, just buy it. Yeah, that's been an interesting approach that we've been taking in terms of acquiring TextMesh Pro, Cinemachine, and now Pro Builder. And, you know, I'm with it. If there's a great tool available on the asset store that the community is already kind of voting for with their dollars, right, and adopting and using, and it's a tool that we believe in, it makes a lot of sense, right, to make it a part of Unity. So I'm super happy that that's happened now with Pro Builder. If you guys missed the announcement, it just came out today at 5 p.m. Pro Builder is now part of Unity. They've joined the Unity team and brought their asset with them, and it's now free on the asset store. So pretty cool news. Yes. Dennis Biron says, probably you guys will have a live learning event for Pro Builder. Yes, indeed we will. I'm actually working with the Pro Builder devs right now to figure out exactly when we'll do that. They're super, super busy right now for the release. And we'll probably want to take a little bit of a tiny break now that they finally released the news and released the latest version. So I'll give them a little break. But yeah, we'll definitely get them on here to give you guys a look at what they're doing. And we're working on like a shorter feature video on Pro Builder that we'll be releasing not this coming Monday, but the following Monday is the target. So watch out for that. That'll just be like a more of an overview kind of video, but should be some good information there. Yeah. All right. So without further ado, let's go right into it. So tonight or today, depending on what time it is where you are, we are going to be going through the material for day 3. So this is learning cycles 9 through 13. There's a good chunk of content here, probably about 80 or 90 minutes of content. So this is going to be a longer session. This content will be published to YouTube afterwards. So if it gets super late for you, I understand, no hard feelings, and feel free to check it out in the archive. So we're going to start by looking at integrating the game manager. We're also going to look at displaying the lap time, some UI stuff. We're going to be looking at TextMesh Pro for that. Speaking of things acquired by Unity, which is super, super cool technology with their signed distance field text rendering. And we're going to be looking at integrating TextMesh Pro and Timeline for a countdown. And then we're also going to be looking at that intro cutscene. So some really, really cool stuff coming up for you guys. And let's dive right in with integrating the game manager.
We're going to kind of handle the logic at a single step. The actual logic of this game is really easy, right? Did you go around the circle? Yes, cool. Did you do it 3 times? Yes, you're done. There's not a whole lot of logic to this, so we're going to kind of handle this all at once. We're going to add something called a game manager, which is a name that I like to use for something that manages the game. I know it sounds clever, but there's also a particular style we use to like sort of build these, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. It involves a little bit of code, and we're going to see how this sort of works. So back in Unity here, I've got my ship, I've got all this stuff going on, and I need some way to know that I have completed a game. We're going to add some UI in the next step and stuff like that. So I want to talk a little bit about what our game manager is, and then we're going to sort of use it here. So I'm going to go to my scripts folder, and I'm going to notice that one of these things is not like the other, all right? One of these things does not belong. And so Unity basically takes any script, yeah, that's right. Unity basically takes any script named Game Manager and makes it look like that. I'm not sure when that happened, but it happens now. And it's just a common thing to call some centralized object that keeps track of our game. And I'm going to open it up. And it's a fairly simple thing. And so the first thing that might catch some people a little off guard, especially if you're not a programmer, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, is that a game manager has a public static reference to itself. At least this one does. What that effectively means is that I don't need to have a reference to this game manager. I can just say, game manager, wherever you are, do this, or I need that, or whatever, right? So I can just get a reference to it globally, easily, right? It's just in one centralized location, which is a pretty cool thing. This is a design pattern a lot of programmers call a singleton, and a lot of programmers who come from certain disciplines immediately hate me because in certain circles, singletons are really evil, and Unity, they're really good. So just keep that in mind. And if you don't have any idea what I'm talking about right now, don't worry about it. I've mostly made up everything I just said. So really don't worry about it. So we have this game manager. It just has a reference to itself, so we can always just say, game manager, are you out there? Yes, well then do this for me, whatever. So then we're going to define some race settings, how many laps we need, where our vehicle movement is, so we know how fast the vehicle is going and stuff like that. We have some UI references that don't exactly exist yet. We don't have a ship UI. We don't have some lap times UI. We have this game manager or game over UI, which is in here, and I'll show you here in a second. And then we just have some variables to keep track of the state of our game. So first off, is the game over? Right? If the game is over, then we're going to kind of stop doing everything. And then has the game even begun? If the race hasn't begun, we're still not going to do anything. So there's going to be a sweet spot between the race has started and the race has finished, where everything is going to take place. Now we have an awake method. Awake is very much like start. You saw a start method previously. Awake just runs before start when the object first starts up, it's first created. And we're basically saying, hey, if we don't have an instance, if we don't know what the game manager is, then guess what? We're the game manager, yay. But if we do have a game manager and it's not us, boo, we destroy ourselves. All right, so the game manager says, if I'm the first game manager, then I'm the game manager. If I'm not, then I'm just gonna go away because you can only have one game manager and it's gonna destroy itself, right? Makes sense, you don't wanna have two. And so then we're gonna initialize our scene in a slightly different way. So I have on enable, very much like start, very much like awake. On enable is called every time we turn an object on. So if I were to enable it and disable it and enable it and disable it in the inspector, on enable is getting called every time I turn it on. It's also getting called the first time it's created, anytime it is enabled. And we are going to say, let's start a coroutine. Now, coroutine might sound like a really complex thing, but it's basically just something that allows us to delay or wait or just do something in steps. So instead of saying like clean your room and you go clean your room, you say clean your room and I'll do this part today and I'll do the next part tomorrow and the next part after that. It just allows us to like stop and then come back at a later date. The reason we're doing that is that right now, we don't have to do that. Right now, we could just start and initialize right when this starts up. But later, we're gonna have a cutscene, right? And the cutscene is gonna have our camera fly around and it's gonna show some cool stuff before the race has technically begun, while the players are waiting to begin playing. During that time, the game hasn't begun yet. So if we start the game up on our first frame, like right when the game manager starts up, well, then the game is running and time is accumulating while our cinematic is playing, which is not what we want. By waiting a single frame in order to start the game, we give the cutscene, the timeline, just enough time to say, stop game manager, wait, and then do its thing, and they go, okay, now go, right? We need to wait a single frame to make that happen, and so that's why we do this as what's called a coroutine. So inside this init method, this coroutine, we're basically just updating our UI, our lap number, and then we're saying, wait a single frame, yield return null, just wait 1 second. Not even a second, really just a single frame, which is a millisecond, right? And then it's gonna initialize and do the rest of the stuff, which is where it's gonna get our lap times ready to go and say, okay, now the race has begun. All right, so just gonna wait a single frame for that. Inside update, we're gonna update our UI. If we currently have an active game, we're gonna add the amount of time that's passed, which is time.delta time, the amount of time that has passed, to our lap times, and we're just gonna update our lap time UI. Whenever the player completes a lap, so whenever the method player completed a lap is called, we're gonna say, hey, is the game already over? If it is, I don't know how the player managed to go through the finish line again, so whatever, but we're just gonna ignore it and get out of here. Otherwise, we're gonna increment our lap, so we'll go from lap 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and so on. We're gonna update some UI, and we're gonna say, okay, if we've completed as many laps as we need, we completed 3 and we're supposed to complete 3, that means the game is over. So is game over is true, we update the final UI time, and then we show this other game object that's gonna pop up and just says, game over, would you like to play again? We have these UI methods, which aren't super important right now because we don't have any UI yet. We'll see those in the next couple steps. But basically saying, if we have a UI, update it. If we have a UI, update it. If we have a UI, update it, so on and so forth. And click and drag and break everything. Basically saying, you know what, just pass some values into the UI and then it's just gonna appear in the UI. And you'll see what I mean by the way, UI user interface, in case anyone's going, what the hell is he talking about? We'll see that in the next couple steps. So I'm just kind of glossing over right now. If something is an active game, that means the race has begun and it is not game over. All right? So this concept might seem a little familiar because if we recall, back in the player input, the very first script we looked at today, we said, hey, if there's a game manager and it is not an active game, then we have no inputs. Our rudder and our thruster is 0 and we are not braking. So basically, if the game has not begun, but we do have a game manager, then no inputs. That way we can't drive before it's time, or we can't drive after the game is done. Right? That's how we disable our players. All right. So, in effect, this is a fairly easy thing to work with. So I'm going to go down to my prefabs folder. And in my prefabs folder, I have a game manager folder, and I have a game manager prefab, which I'm just going to drag and drop into my hierarchy. So there's my game manager. And it has a game over UI on it. And if I turn it on, my game view, it looks like this. Game over. Would you like to replay? All right, so I'm just going to leave that off right now because it shouldn't be on to start. And if you wonder, okay, there's this UI, where did that come from? How do we make that? That's the next couple steps. So we have a UI right now, but you'll learn. You'll see exactly how this whole thing came together here in the next couple steps. And so our game manager just says, okay, how many laps have we done? So the default's 3, I'll leave that at 3. For the vehicle movement, I'm just going to click the circle selector. There's only one in my scene, so that makes it nice and easy. I'll just double click on my ship. I don't have these other 2 things, so I'm just going to leave that as is. So that's all well and good. It's going to start accumulating time and doing all that cool stuff, but I don't have any way of knowing, did I complete a lap, right? What does that mean? What does completing a lap mean when I have no real finish line or anything? So down inside this game manager folder, I also have this finish line. I'm going to drag and drop that into the hierarchy as well, and it's going to create a giant Cineplex screen. All right, so I'm going to get this thing. This is my finish line. So the finish line has a simple script on it called the finish line script, which basically says if the player or the player sensor, remember the trigger collider that was on the very beginning of the ship we talked about, the beginning of step 4, if that passes through this object here, we complete a lap. Not only that though, to keep the players from cheating where they can just drive through and then drive back, we have a little second collider up here. Prevent some cheating, be a little shifty here. You have to pass through this collider before you can pass through that one. So the only way to pass through this collider is either to fly, which our ships cannot do, or to complete a lap, right? So that keeps them honest. So they pass through this collider, that allows them to pass through this collider, and then they've completed a lap. Now the last thing I'm going to do here is this wall doesn't look very good, right? And so one of the cool things I wanted to show you all is how we can add materials to objects in our scene. And so I'm going to change the material on this ship. And I could do a lot of things. I could right click and create a material and set up all this stuff on it. Or I could click on the finish line here and I could find its material setting in here somewhere and swap it out and do all this stuff. But here's another thing I can do. In my project folder, my project view, I don't know where all my materials are. So I can click this little button here. It says search by type. It's got a little triangle, a circle, and a square. And I'm going to click material. And that's going to show me every material I have in my project. Here they are. And I've got 3 or 4 materials that I'm considering here. So I've got this edge blue, edge green, edge orange, and edge red. Doesn't really matter which one I use. I'm going to do blue. And I can just click and drag it onto the wall. You can see here. It previews what it's going to look like. That was what it would look like on some rocks if I wanted it there. And we're in the back. We're up on the sky. Right? But I don't. I'm going to put it right there. And I'll just let go. And now it's applied there. So that is my finish line. So I don't want to actually sit up here and complete 3 whole laps right now, because that would not be necessary. So if I go on my finish line, one other thing I can do is I have just a checkbox called debug mode. If I turn that on, I don't need to complete a whole lap. Every time I pass through there, it's counted as a lap. And so I'll just click debug mode, and now I will drive through. You know what? I'm actually going to mute that audio. I'm going to drive through. So there's 1, and then 2, and then 3. Oh, wait, maybe the second time I didn't leave all the way. 3, there we go, game over. I can no longer control my player or anything, and if I want, I can just click replay and it brings me back.
It's worth mentioning that the actual thing triggering what is going through the finish line is that sensor from the beginning.
Yes, exactly, the one on the very tip of the ship there. And so there we go. So it's a relatively simple step. So what you're going to do is basically going to go to your prefabs folder and then the game manager folder and locate the game manager prefab and just drag that into your hierarchy. And on the game manager, where it says vehicle movement, you can just click the circle selector. There's only one in the scene, your ship, and so you can just add that. And then you're going to go to your finish line prefab and drag that into your hierarchy. Again, you want to drag that into your hierarchy. If you dragged it into your scene view, you don't really know where it's going to be. And that collider that's put up on the racetrack behind you is also going to be somewhere. We don't know where. It may not even be on the track. So you definitely want to drag that into the hierarchy. And then finally, in your project window, if you click the little sort button here and you go to materials, all right, that's going to show you every material you have, and I highly recommend edge blue, edge green, edge orange, or edge red. If you really wanted to though, you could do just kind of whatever you want. I mean, just any material, but there we go. Whatever, word wall. But yeah, but otherwise just the edge ones are the ones for that. And then if you want, you can save your scene, make 3 laps, and then your inputs will be cut off and that UI will pop up. Or you can go on the finish line and just hit debug and just go back and forth through it a couple of times, and that will do it as well.
Okay, so now we have an idea what we're going to do with the game manager. Let's skip ahead to the recap. So the basic steps are we're going to drag the game manager prefab into the hierarchy. On the game manager script, we're going to set the vehicle movement property to the ship. We're going to drag the finish line prefab into the hierarchy, and we're going to drag the edge blue material onto the finish line to change its material. Let's just take a look at the chat and see how folks are doing. Let's see. AndRacer108 is asking, is there a way to change Cinemachine virtual camera's body settings via script? I haven't actually done it myself, but my instinct would be to say yes. Pretty much anything that's a component in Unity can be changed via script. So yeah. Yeah, the follow offset, I'm sure you can change via script. Yield return null, waits a frame. Yeah, that's right. It yields execution for a frame and then continues. You can mute Unity's audio in the editor. There's just a mute button in the scene view. I think it's just called mute audio up in the upper right-hand corner of the scene view, if I remember. I don't actually have the editor open right now. Yep, it's called mute audio. Okay, so I'm actually going to just speed right ahead just to keep the momentum here, and then we'll continue discussing in the chat on Unity Connect. So the next cycle that we're moving on to is recording the lap times with some UI.
So we're now on to cycle 10, displaying the lap times. So I've actually broken down the way we're going to display UI in the game into a couple of steps, partly because some UI is going to be displayed in screen space, and I'll explain that a little bit later on, and some of the UI is actually going to be attached to the back of the ship. So as the ship moves and the ship banks and yaws, the UI is going to move along with it. So there's two steps. One is displaying the lap times, because we want to see how fast we're going. Mike's best time is
27.681 seconds. What's your best time, Andy?
27.6, no.
27.685. That's 0.004 seconds slower than mine.
Although,
throwing that out there.
I only saw a screenshot, so he clearly just changed the text or like, yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do now is display the lap times. And what this is going to do is every time, the game manager's hooked up, so every time you go through that final lap, or you go through the lap, it's going to log the time, go to a lap time UI manager, and basically update the lap time. But first of all, I'm going to go through the UI and how we would set that up. So the first thing to do, or the first thing I'm going to do, is go to Game Objects, or right-click in the hierarchy, and you notice that we have a little UI drop-down. And this has a whole load of different options. These are pre-set up game objects, or pre-set up elements that show things such as drop-down, a scroll bar, a slider. To get you up to speed, you have to recreate the structure of a slider every single time. And what I'm just going to create is I'm going to create a basic text element. Now what you'll notice is that when I created that UI element, it didn't just create the text object, it also created a canvas that the text element is a child of. If I select that canvas, and we can't actually see anything in the scene view currently, you'll notice that the canvas has a whole bunch of options. And I'm not going to go through every single one, because again, it's a lot of sliders and a lot of settings. But the first one here is render mode. So screen space overlay will take the UI and it will render on top of everything in your game or in your camera's render. So this is quite handy for having, say, pause menus or health bars or stuff that you don't want to be behind or have a depth that's behind different objects. Next one is screen space camera. We're not actually going to use this one, but what this will do is it will take the canvas and apply it onto a camera. So this is quite handy for having UI that's like in the screen but affected by, say, post-processing or 3D objects and have some depth to it. And the last one is world space, where it takes the canvas and instead of rendering it onto the screen or through a camera, it instead renders it as basically an object and you can apply it and attach it to something, like a health bar above a character's head, or in our case, the speed and the current lap position, the current lap number for the ship on the back of the ship.
One thing too, so in this particular project, we're using the two types. We're using a screen space overlay and we're using a world space. And we're not using that screen space camera, as Andy just said. However, in the director's cut, the enhanced version we'll be sending out, we will be using the camera version, screen space camera, because we're going to have 2 players. So we don't want 2 overlays where the numbers are on top of each other. So each player gets their own camera-specific canvas, and that's when we're going to use the overlay camera setting. So each player's camera gets its own one.
So with that canvas created and that text element, which just says hello, new text, what shall I write, Mike? Hello, Austin. Actually, let's go full Mike. Howdy, Austin.
Howdy, Austin.
I don't think I've ever heard you say hello. It's always howdy. So this, using that F to focus, so selecting the canvas, if we're F, we have the great big canvas in the sky, as you can see here. So you notice that we actually have our canvas, determined by these white lines, floating as a huge thing in the sky. However, it's not actually floating in the sky in the game. If we look to the game view, you'll notice that we have the text, or the canvas, rendered in screen space overlay, overlaying everything in our final end game render. We don't worry too much about this being displayed in the scene because our players are not going to see this bit. We only really sort of care about how it's displayed here. Now, if I select this text that says Howdy Austin, this is the base Unity default text for the UI. And you'll notice here we have very sort of basic functionality like text, and we can set different fonts and font style, and we can set it to wrap and position it and set colors and things like that. But it can be quite limiting, and you may have to write shaders or do lots of other elements to make the text a lot more interesting. And we noticed this problem. So what we did is we acquired TextMesh Pro, which is an asset from the asset store, earlier this year. And we're now working on sort of integrating some of that tech into Unity over time. But for the time being, TextMesh Pro is now free to download and to use. And we're actually going to use TextMesh Pro, and I'll show you a run through of it now, of how many settings and how many different options that you get with this, this system. So rather than sticking with this Unity UI text, I'm just going to delete it. And then on the canvas, I'm going to create, go to UI, with TextMesh Pro imported, which this project already does, and that disappeared, so that's nice. You'll notice that we have normal standard Unity UI text and TextMesh Pro text. So let's create that. It's currently white, but one thing you'll notice is that on the right-hand side, we have all these options to play with. We can even add kind of faked lighting and emission to the text. Anyone who remembers or still uses like Microsoft Word art is going to have a field day with this. I'm expecting to see some pretty horrific, I mean beautiful text. So if I just get this to say, hello, Austin. One thing you'll notice is that we still have the great big canvas in the sky, but changing the rect transform or changing this box will allow you to determine how big the text box is and the position of it as well. So let's just position this in the middle.
You can also easily edit this stuff by turning your scene view into 2D mode. So this whole day it's been in 3D mode. There's actually a little button at the top of the scene window there that says 2D, and when you click it, you basically lose the Z-axis and you just snap to 2D mode so you can see it flat as an overlay, exactly as it's rendering in UI, or as UI.
So if we have a look in, it says hello Austin. What we can see here is one of these options on the component is a font asset. So whereas with Unity UI text, each component or each game object with Unity text would have its own settings, and people sort of go crazy and add drop shadows to some stuff and outlines to some other things. With TextMesh Pro, you actually create a font asset, and this will hold the material settings. So you can create, say, a font asset for your header text, for your main body text. It's kind of like a style sheet, and then apply that accordingly. So when we come later on to having the UI, the screen UI has its own font asset to determine the style. So you change one, and all the others will change. And the ship UI will also have the same thing. So here we just have the base font asset. And if I click this, you can see that you can actually switch it out to different styles. But we're going to leave it on just this one. We have a whole bunch of options, very complex stuff like making the text bold and making it italic, and making it set the vertex color to be a certain thing. You can even go, here we go, color gradient, if people really want to do this. Hang on, let me just set this back to white. So you can actually choose a color gradient and choose a library. So we now have lovely gradient in the vertex color of the text from top to bottom.
You can also define your own.
Yeah, you can create your own styles and things like that. And when we scroll down, so this is just the component settings for TextMesh Pro. When we scroll down, we actually have the font assets material that it's signed up to. And TextMesh Pro comes with a whole stack of different shaders. You can render things in bitmap, but what TextMesh Pro does is you can render your text in distance field, or sign distance field, which means that your UI, as you scale the text up and scale the text down, rather than rendering its kind of texture, it's going to render the gap that it has from the edges, and it's going to look really crisp at various different resolutions. So in this case, we have distance field enabled, and of course there is mobile versions of this as well, so lots of stuff you can play around with. You can even render sprites like emojis for all the millennials who want to add that to their game. It's very nice. And when you modify and change things in these material settings, anything else that has this font asset will take those same options. So if we go here, and let's just change this to, I don't know, like very subtle blue, we can then soften up the text a little bit. We can change the dilation of the text. This is going to look so bad. Mike, give me a color.
Gray. Puce.
Puce. You can also specify a texture for not only the face of each character, but also the outline. So we could go, okay, I'm not really sure which one to choose.
Sunrise Surprise.
Sunrise Surprise, great.
It's a type of yellow.
Oh, okay. So you can see that you can actually place texture on there. You can use an underlay. Okay, this looks really bad, but that's fine. I'm sure everyone here is going to make significantly better stuff. You can also enable lighting, so we now have like a weird bevel. And first time I played with TextMesh Pro, I met the guy, I said, you realize everyone's just going to add everything to it. He goes, my job's not to dictate what people do with it, it's to dictate if they can do it, which is a very nice way of getting out of that.
Everyone wondered whether or not we could, that no one stopped to wonder whether or not we should.
Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum, Jurassic Park.
Okay, moving on. So here I've also applied emissions. So you can see that you can actually, it's probably not a good idea to turn on everything, but I'm kind of showing that as you add all these different elements, it basically builds up your end piece of text. And the really cool thing about this is if I now zoom into this text and keep zooming in and in, it will look quite crisp. And if we go into wireframe mode, it will render each text element as, I'm not sure if that's seeable on there.
It's very dark.
It's basically two triangles, whereas beforehand with Unity UI text, you'd add a shadow and it would like render the character again. You'd add an outline and render the character again.
So it's very efficient.
Yes. So you get a ton of options. Now this looks like a car crash, so I'm going to delete this. Really, really bad. And instead, we're actually going to use and set up, we're going to use a prefab with already some lap time UI already set up and positioned with a nicer, significantly nicer style. So under the prefabs section, we have the UI folder. Inside here, we have the lap time UI. I'm going to drag that into the hierarchy. And one thing you'll notice is that we have 4 text elements here, all using TextMesh Pro. If I select one of them, you'll notice that it has the, I somehow managed to get the gradient in there. Probably Mike wasn't too happy, I'm not sure.
No, that's good.
And we have all these styles here. And each of these text elements uses that same font asset. So if I now, for example, modify the offset here, or change the drop shadow to be, I don't know, like white, or, oh, that's a bad choice, like blue, you'll notice that they're all having the same effect. So rather than having all your text having different styles, you can create some for body, some for header, and some for different things. So we have this lap time UI. Now, these are just placeholder for the time being. Actually, when we run the game manager is going to update the lap time. So it'll start off by basically setting all the values to null or nothing.
Empty string.
Yeah, so it doesn't just say 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And on this canvas, we have here, rendered in screen space, we have this lap time UI manager, which has basically got references to these labels. And this is then going to have the data passed to it of your lap time from the game manager. So with this prefab dragged in, we can go to the game manager. And here, it's looking for a lap time UI. We can click the little target, and we only have one lap time UI script or lap time UI manager in our scene. We can select that. And now when we go into play mode, you'll notice that the element is then changing because it's started counting. And if I drive through here, I did it in 5 seconds, so I beat the time, Mike.
Damn.
Oh, look, I beat it in 4:3. Right. How are you going to win?
Just keeps getting better.
There we go. That's human machine learning right there. So yeah, and what you can notice is that the element is then updating with the current time. Every time you go through that final lap, it's then saying, the script is then saying, okay, you finished the lap, get the current time, send it to the lap time UI to update the relevant
Those
UI
were the
element.
methods in the game manager we skipped over kind of briefly because the UI didn't exist. All it's doing is it's passing some data to the UI and it's just writing it there as a string.
And at the very end, we have a total or a sum of all these numbers or all these times, and then we can replay. So it's actually quite a short step, but it's a very fun experimental step. So if you really, really liked the abomination that I created, that's lovely. I'm sure you're going to do much better things because I'm not an artist. But that is basically the step. So kind of to go over it again, create a brand new canvas. And rather than creating the text element, just create a brand new Text Mesh Pro text on the canvas. And then modify and change with the settings. Again, there's tons of sliders and tons of options, kind of like Cinemachine. So don't go through all of them now, but have a play around with the different material settings that you can set. Then when you've sort of had fun and finished playing with that, you can then delete that. And remember, it will store that font asset so you can use it again in the future if you really want to. Then bring in that lap time UI prefab with the elements already anchored to the top of the top left-hand corner. And then on the game manager, set the lap time UI to be the lap time UI script. So it's a pretty straightforward step. So we switch over to the slides. In the hierarchy, create a canvas, create the Text Mesh Pro text, do those things. Of course, you could bypass step 1 if you've already used Text Mesh Pro, or you're not that interested, and pretty much go straight to step 3. It's really up to you.
Okay, so we've seen how to set up Text Mesh Pro and get started with our UI. Text Mesh Pro is also, like ProBuilder, is an asset that was developed by a asset store developer and then acquired by Unity. Super cool technology using signed distance fields to render really nice crispy text. And you can grab that for free. I put the link in the central chat. If you want to add it to a different project, it's already been downloaded for you in the project that we distributed for the training here. And so I encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. And so let's see how the chat is doing. I do want to remind you guys that this project is configured for Unity 2017.3, the latest release. So you will need that in order to follow along. You can grab that. I put the link in the chat, unity3d.com, get unity/download. And yeah, so let's just continue right along. We've covered displaying the lap times, and we're going to move on to displaying the ship UI, which is actually really cool.
So the next step that we're going to do is also UI related. It's displaying the ship UI. This is kind of going to be a little bit similar in that we have a prefab set up with some positions and things, so we don't have to worry about this stuff. But instead of rendering it into the screen space, we're actually going to take this canvas, which is going to be screen space, and convert it to world space, which is quite a common thing to do, especially if you want to do health bars or things, UI placed around the world somewhere. So to do this, I'm going to take this ship UI prefab, which is also in the UI prefabs folder, and drag it into the hierarchy. And what we'll notice is that we have a canvas in screen space already set up, as you can see here, and as you can already see here, and as you can already see, positioned in the game view like so. And each of these elements, of which there are 4, are using a font asset called OneShipUI. Now, we have one screen UI, so if I just change one of these to one screen UI, it's then going to use the same settings, not the vertex color settings, which is why it didn't have gradient on it. But you can see here that these 4 are using the same font asset. It's different to the screen space, to the lap time asset. And it means I could do things like I can change the color, and you'll notice that all of them will change alongside it. So it's quite handy to have the font assets properly set up so you can change one, and all others using it will change the same style. And this one, it's got a little bit, so what we've done here is rather than go a little crazy, we've got our face, we've dilated the text, which means we've kind of expanded it a little bit. So you can see here, you can actually change the text dilation. That's a beautiful thing that signed distance field rendering of text does for us. And the other thing we've done is actually added a subtle glow. So this is kind of like an emission around the text. So this is the text currently, and it's a bit basic, but adding that glow adds a little bit more to it. And because it's going on the back of the ship, it's going to feel like it's a bit more world space, and it's actually feel like it's actually part of the scene, part of the setup. So to do that, I'm going to take this text element, or take the canvas, and change it from screen space overlay to world space. And it will now disappear. That doesn't mean that it's turned off or deleted or corrupted or anything like that. It basically means that you can actually see it up in the top corner here. It means that it's taken this UI, or taken that screen space UI, and it's now massive in the game world. So if we raced around and looked up, you'd actually be able to see the text floating in the sky, because it's now one massive world space element. Now, we don't want massive text floating in the sky, because this isn't like a VR project, which is actually kind of quite fitting. We want it to actually apply to the back of the ship. So even though this UI isn't going to be interactable, so we don't need an event camera, we're going to do that anyway, partly because that's an optimization thing. It's just generally a good practice. So if you don't have an event camera set up, the canvas is going to be pinging to find the camera pretty much every frame, and it's an incredibly expensive thing to do. So to fix this, and it's not related to this game, because we're not going to be able to click this UI, but it's handy to have anyway, we can click the little target. We only have one camera, because remember, Cinemachine cameras aren't actual Unity cameras, and set that up like that. So it's not actually needed, but it's good to point out anyway, and then people will have less overhead or less processing going to just finding a camera every frame. So now that we have the ship UI, and it's a world space object, we can actually position it around in the world. And actually, if I select the game view and have the ship UI like this, here's the zither. So you can see it's actually an object in the scene somewhere. Now, we don't want it to be positioned just anywhere. We want it to be positioned on the back of the ship, specifically on the back here with one bit of text here and one bit of text here as well. So we can take the ship UI, and because it's now a world space object, we can actually child it to the ship's body. And we're going to child it to the ship's body so that as the ship's body rolls, the UI will go with it. If we just child it to the main ship, the yaw of the actual ship's body, the ship will move, but then the UI will stay the same, and it'll look a bit weird, and instead now it's going to move alongside it, or move in parallel to it. However, this text is still absolutely massive, so we need to shrink it down. So to do this, I'm just going to go to the scene view so you can actually see the UI changing. Going to select the ship UI. We already have all the numbers worked out, so we're going to use 0, not 0, 0.29, minus 1.8. And what it's going to do is it's then going to position the canvas to the kind of the back of the ship. It's still absolutely massive, and we're going to obviously turn this down. It should be fine. Rotation is 0. No, rotation is actually 50. 0, like that. So we now have it generally sort of attached. So I could actually go into play mode and you see this big text that's flying as a massive spoiler behind my ship, but that's not ideal. So the next one is to set the scale down. So we could either do this by taking the scale tool and then scaling the text down, like so. So we can keep scaling it down, until it's into the right position, the right size, but instead, we already worked out these values, so it's 0.002, and we now have the text scaled down, still looking very crisp, partly because we're using TextMesh Pro, and it looks super nice, attached to the back of the ship, both on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And the very last step is to go to the game manager. You'll notice that it's looking for a ship UI to update, and it's basically the same as lap time UI in that this ship UI has a script that has the references, and it's going to update what's your current speed, what current lap you're on. And clicking the target or the selector, we can then choose the ship UI. So there's that. So there's a couple of steps to that. One is to take the ship UI prefab and bring it into the scene, kind of like how we did with the lap time UI. The next one is to take the ship UI and to set its render mode from screen space overlay to world space, so we can position it somewhere in the scene, so it's not rendered to the screen, it is now an object in the world. Next thing was, when it's world space, is to set up the event camera. It's very, very quick, very simple. We only have one camera, so that's fine. Next one is to take the ship, to child it to the ship body, and then to set the position, the rotation, and scale. So rather than being a massive UI that's not out of position, it's actually scaled down and rotated to a good spot on the back of the ship. And then to go to the game manager and hook up that lap time UI. And one thing I'll show you before you go do all that is another thing that TextMesh Pro supplies is with their big library of different type of shaders, is that we have distance field surface, which means it's interactive. It can be affected by light, so if you have point lights and directional lights and things like that.
Surface as in surface shaders.
Yeah. And distance field overlay. If we set this to distance field, basically it's now, because it's positioned in the scene somewhere, it will be affected by, say, like post-processing and particles. You can actually see the distortion on the back of the ship is actually affecting the UI. That's actually kind of cool. But as we race around, if the ship banks, it's then going to be covered by bits of the ship, and also post-processing can affect it. So you could leave it at that if you really wanted to, but we want UI to be readable, otherwise there's not really much point to it. So we can take the UI elements and then set it back to a distance field overlay, which means it's going to render, even though in the world, on top of all these different effects. So the text will actually be readable.
It's also a very common workflow to be aware of when working with world space UIs. You'll notice we didn't start with a small UI and try to make changes or anything like that, because that's really difficult to do and it's hard to get things to line up, and nothing is ever quite the way we want. We generally start with a very large UI, even in overlay mode, and we set up how we want things positioned relative to each other, and just basically this giant canvas, we kind of move stuff around and anchor it, and then we just scale the whole thing down and place it. It's much, much simpler than starting with something very small and trying to move fractions of a pixel and stuff like that, which is actually quite difficult. So start with something very large, and then just scale it down to be the size you want and placed in your scene.
So if we go into play mode to see the end result, we then have our speed. Hang on. We then have our speed on the left, and you can see that the ship, is it the vehicle movement that's applying that?
Yep.
Yeah, the vehicle movement is then applying the speed. And then on the right, you'll notice that it says laps 2 or 3 because it triggered that first debug lap. And I could have really just reversed back and forth, but I kind of want to show you that as the ship pulls out, you'll notice that the UI is then attached to the ship. And it's still generally quite readable, but it's quite a nice, nice effect that you can have, rather than just displaying it to the edges of the screen. If we get this around it.
Don't crash.
All right. So you can see here, yeah.
Cool.
So if we go over to the steps, these are them.
Okay, so we've seen how to display the ship UI. We're using World Space UI. A reminder to set the event camera of the ship's UI canvas to the main camera is a big one. Otherwise, Unity will search for a camera, basically using something like GameObject.find under the hood. So that is an important one to do when you're setting up World Space UI. And we had some questions about multi-monitor game support. I'm not sure if Unity currently supports that. As Mike says, you could, of course, go into windowed mode and stretch the game across multiple monitors, but I'm not sure what it would look like. It might be interesting to try. All right, let's see what else folks are discussing. Yeah, I'm just not that familiar with multi-monitor gaming setups in general for any type of game, but I don't know, I wonder how many people have those kind of setups. All right, we're just reading back here. Okay, so I think we're pretty on track with the questions, so let's just keep moving right ahead. We're going to move into looking at sequencing the countdown.
Okay, so we're going to now focus on timeline. Now, timeline is a huge topic. We could easily make a 1-day, 2-day, just timeline-focused workshop. But what we wanted to do is kind of have a chunk section of this training day that integrates timeline, so you can see how it works with Cinemachine, and how it works with UI, and all these different parts. Because timeline is a very, very powerful tool. Timeline is a very powerful tool in that it gives you a sequencer and a timeline that you can pretty much control. I'm not going to say everything in Unity.
I'm going to say everything in Unity.
Okay, so if you find something, blame Mike. If not, say thanks, Andy. So, yeah. I'd say 99% of things it can control over time. And it can control things that are very typical, like let's say animation or audio, like you play an audio sound effect at a point, or a character waves at another character at a certain point, and things like that. or plays particles, but you can also get it to control and script it and extend it to control all sorts of different things. Like the first thing I did was create a custom script that replicated bullet time. So you can add a section on the timeline that would go into slow motion bullet time by modifying the time scale. So you can actually script it and modify it and do a whole load of different things. And we're actually going to have two timelines. One we're going to create from scratch, so you see the workflow of creating a new timeline and adding clips and adding tracks and that workflow. The other one's already kind of half made, but we've removed some pieces so that we're going to finish it up, partly because it will take too long to build both of them. So you kind of see one that's already made and one kind of half made, and we're going to plug in the gaps together. There's going to be a couple of steps with this, and there's lots of different things and lots of new UI things, so we're going to have a lot of fun. Yeah, Mike's the optimist, yeah. Okay, cool. So the first thing we're going to do is, in the prefabs folder, there is a timeline folder. And inside here, we have two different prefabs, Countdown UI and Cutscene Timeline. So if you remember, at the very beginning of the training day, we had that intro cutscene where the camera flied through on the track and then like zoomed into the back of the ship. That was the cutscene timeline, and we already have the prefab with the camera shot set up. Then we had that 3, 2, 1 go of the text popping down and the audio and the animation and things like that. That's the timeline we're going to create. So rather than dropping in the deep end and doing some complicated stuff, we're going to make a very basic timeline and then slowly build ourselves up. Rather than scaring everyone at the beginning, we're going to build ourselves up very, very slowly. So we're going to create that 3, 2, 1 countdown, 3, 2, 1 go countdown, then integrate it into that intro cutscene. It'll all make sense in the end, don't worry. So we have here the Countdown UI prefab. So I'm just going to drag that into the scene, or into the hierarchy. And here we have Go. And again, this is using TextMesh Pro, or TextMesh Go, as it should be called.
There we go.
Hey-o. Now this Go text is then going to be the 3, 2, 1 go. And it's going to have an animation and audio playing. And it is just a screen space canvas that sits there, rendering in front of everything on our game, to have that countdown and display it for us. Now in the project, underneath the timeline, actually there is no timeline folder. Oh, underneath the timelines folder, you'll see that we already have one element here, and this is a timeline asset. Because each timeline, each sequence you create is an asset, which means you can use it in different scenes. So if we had a racing game with 5 levels, we could take that 3, 2, 1 go timeline and put it in each scene. And then if we change the main base one, it's then going to apply that same asset changes. Kind of like the post-processing stack with the post-processing profiles, and kind of like TextMesh Pro font assets. So that way you change one local or one central piece, and then all instances of it change. Kind of like a prefab and stuff like that. So here we have this cutscene. Instead, you're going to create a brand new timeline from scratch. So right-click, create, and timeline, which is this one here. Now that we have this timeline, we need to rename it. So we're going to rename this to Countdown. And then what we're going to do is drag this timeline asset onto the Countdown UI object. And what that will do is it'll actually add a new component in 2017.1 called a playable director. And the playable director will take a timeline asset and then play it in your game. So you could have something like a conversation between two characters when your character walks into a room. So when your character walks into the room, you can say playable director with the conversation timeline, play, and then it will play that cutscene. So you can actually take timelines and play them at the beginning, at the end, in the middle of a game, and in all sorts of different scenarios. The default settings are actually pretty good. So you can have the update method in game time, or unscaled game time if you want, like a pause menu and you have some timeline playing. Play on awake is also kind of very similar to the audio sources. So we want this timeline to play from the very beginning of the game. And we can have this timeline looping over and over again. So like a day-night cycle, constantly looping over and over again. In this case, we only want it to go 3, 2, 1, go, not constantly putting you on edge saying 3, 2, 1, go, 3, 2, 1, go, 3, 2, 1, go. So we can leave it to none. Now, with this playable director component on here, we basically need to open up the timeline window to then edit the sequence. That's very easy to do. Underneath Window and Timeline Editor. You'll have this editor, and it will probably fill up the middle scene or be popped out, depending how you set up. But I always find the best place to place this is actually at the bottom, kind of like an animation track, or the animation window. So we have this timeline view here. Now, before we start adding tracks, or before I start adding tracks, You'll notice here we have a little icon, and this is the timeline selector. So when you have lots of different timelines in your scene, you can click this, and it will show all the timelines in your scene. So you can jump between conversations characters are having. You can jump between different cutscenes. In this case, make sure you have countdown UI being the object that the timeline is placed on, selected. We only have one timeline, so it will probably be this one. And the next thing to do is also go to the top right-hand corner of the timeline editor and lock it. Because as you select different objects, timeline will change its focus. We don't want to do that. We want to work entirely in this one timeline, so we're going to lock it. I'm going to say timeline quite a lot over the next hour. Yeah. So that's the steps. We're just basically setting it up. We're then going to sequence some things. So we'll now have the next step of, we'll then have the next cycle for people to then do that bit now. So all I did was take the countdown UI prefab, dragged it into the scene. So we now have this nice Go text in the middle. Went to the timelines folder and went right-click and created a brand new timeline asset. Then renamed it to countdown. Dragged the countdown asset onto the countdown UI game object so it adds this playable director. Of course, you could do add component playable director and then set it up, but that's extra steps. And then opened up the timeline editor and the window timeline editor, docked it to the bottom. Make sure it should be there, but I thought I'd point out the selector anyway. If it doesn't, it should be on countdown being the name of the timeline asset and countdown UI being the name of the game object, and then lock it there. And that's basically this next cycle. We'll get to the fun stuff in a second, don't worry.
Okay, cool. So we've seen how to get started with timeline, right? As Oscar was saying in the chat, that in the past you would have had to do this with a bunch of coroutines waiting for each other and a bunch of scripting or a bunch of animation, and it could get complicated, right? So this is a really nice, easy way to get this working. And this is a great example of one of the things that Unity's timeline feature is really, really useful for. Andre in the chat says that he did a day-night cycle with timeline that was super easy, took like 15 minutes to implement. Awesome to hear. Lilith is suggesting 3, 2, 1, go, popping up from the sand. That's a cool idea with some particles coming off it. I like it. Super cool. All right, good. So let's just keep going right along. I'm going to move on to the next phase of our timeline presentation.
So now we're going to do some fun stuff. We come back to the view. So we now have this timeline, but it's empty. And we want to actually sequence and position something to change. In this case, 3, 2, 1, go, with audio, animation, and text. We're going to do this piece by piece. So we're going to start off by doing the animation. So if I select the countdown text, and if I drag it into this timeline window, you'll notice that, okay, some people might notice, you'll notice that we have a bunch of tracks. So timeline has a track system where each track will control different things. Some of them are very self-explanatory. Audio will play audio clips at points in time. Animation will play animation at points in time. There's things like the activation track and Cinemachine track, which I'll explain a bit later on. But in this case, we want the go to come down and animate in a certain way. So I'm going to select animation track. And you notice it has a reference to that countdown text element. Now that I have this here, I can actually scrub through. So if you used Unity's animation window, where you can scrub through the animation and preview it back, it's pretty much exactly the same thing. And just as a note, you can also double-click the animation track and open it into the animation window and sort of modify things, then go back to timeline to manipulate them. But as I scrub through, nothing's actually happening right now, because we haven't actually told the countdown text to animate. I've already prepared an animation clip that we're going to add. So if you import in, say, a character with like a run, a jump, a punch, a wave, or backflip, or whatever, you have that animation clip. Kind of like in the animator where you can drag that clip in as a state, you can drag that clip in onto the timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that. I'm going to take a pre-made clip with a little tween of the animation, and then a little tween of the text, and then apply that. So I'm going to right-click this animation track and go down and select Add from Animation Clip. Then here, I have a whole bunch of different animation clips that are in my project. It's quite simple and straightforward. Yours might have significantly more if you're working on a bigger game. But here I have countdown text animation. And when selecting that, you'll notice that we now have a clip. You can position this clip around. And then if I now scrub through this, all this clip does is it animates the position of the text down, and then also animates the alpha. So it will fade it in, and then fade it out. And it's doing that to the Text Mesh Pro element. So we're kind of combining Text Mesh Pro into Timeline, which is pretty cool. So you can see here we have this little clip of it coming down and going go. What I'm now going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate it 4 times. So we now have the same clip applying to the text. So it's now saying go, 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 go.
It really wants you to go.
Yeah, it's like really adamant that you should really go.
It's about time to go, I think. Yes.
And the really cool thing here with Timeline is that I can then grab the playhead and scrub through, and you can actually preview it. So you don't just have to go into play mode and then see the end result. You can scrub through. You can position things. So if I now move this here, you can notice it says go, 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 have a bit of a break, and then go again. As I move things around, they also snap to each other as well. So you can see it will snap to here, so we won't have a very minor gap. So you just have a very simple go, 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 go.
Now you duplicate a clip by just hitting Control-D or Command-D with it selected, or right-clicking and selecting Duplicate.
Another thing I want to add is an audio track. So rather than it's just a silent animation, we want it to go, right, this is where my, so we're going to go, it's going to do 3 low beeps, so boop, 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 and then it's going to do a high beep, like beep, so you go 3, 2, 1, go. I like that.
When he does the high beep. Beep.
I am not a singer, and this is why I'm in video games, not anything else. So rather than dragging and dropping anything onto the timeline, instead, you can right-click in this space, and you'll notice that I have a whole bunch of different tracks that you can choose. Again, some are self-explanatory, some are not. You can choose the audio track. Now, the audio track also has a binding to an object. Now, if you leave this empty, it will just play the audio as a 2D sound. So in this case, it's a UI sound, so we're actually happy with that. But one thing you can do is you can actually bind it to an audio source in your scene to output it through the mixer. So you can actually bind the engine hum into Timeline and route it through the mixer. You could do some pretty cool stuff, but we're not going to do that. Then on the audio track, just like the animation track, I'm going to right-click it, add from audio clip, and then we have the beeps. So I'm going to add the low beep, and I'm not going to try and replicate it again, which basically just says beep. Okay, I just did, but whatever. I'm going to duplicate that twice, and then I'm going to also add another audio clip and have a high beep. So we have 4 clips. And with Timeline, as you move different clips around, they will snap to tracks that are above or below it. So positioning this beep high, you'll notice that as I move it, it'll actually snap to this bit and to the clip above. So let's put that here. And like so. Now, the audio track doesn't actually play back in the editor, unfortunately. So you do have to go into play mode to try it, and the devs know about this and stuff. So you will have to go into play mode to preview the audio. So if I now go into play mode, pardon?
It's muted. I muted the audio. Just unmute it.
No. Oh, okay then. So I now click play. I think my representation of the audio clip.
I think that's dead on.
Thank you. You have to say that because you're standing next to me. And if I'm outside of maximize on play and click play, you can actually see the timeline scrubbing through at the points. Which is actually pretty cool. So we have very first timeline. So it's just an animation and just the audio. You can add some other elements to it, but that is the end of that particular step. So all I did was drag and drop the countdown text onto the timeline, which gives us this window, selected animation track, then right-clicked inside the animation track and added that countdown text animation. Duplicated it 4 times because we want the 3, 2, 1, go to have the same animation. And then for the audio, right-clicked inside the timeline window, created an audio track. Then on that track, did the same thing as the animation clip and added from audio clip beep low, duplicated it twice, and then a beep high. The steps, it sounds more complicated, but the steps are actually quite simple. like so.
Okay, so we've seen how to add the animation and audio using TextMesh Pro. A couple of folks asking some questions in the chat. Let's see what we can answer here. Oscar Lazarino was asking how we created the text effect. So it's a combination of the TextMesh Pro track and then there's also an animation track that's moving the text in timeline. Somebody's asking about where to find the documentation. There's an offline version of the documentation that should download with the Unity editor on your local machine. So if you launch the docs from in the editor, it should launch the local version. I think it's via the help menu. And it might be different on Mac and PC, actually, Mac and Windows. Okay, let's see what we got. Yes, the animation is made outside of the timeline. You can actually animate in timeline, but you're basically just creating animation clips in timeline, and then you can play back. You can choose when you want an animation clip to play back via timeline. So you can think of timeline as a kind of a controller for all kinds of linear events, including animation, but not limited to it, right? You can see that we're playing audio. You're going to see that we can also control Cinemachine with it, and much more. So let's actually just continue ahead because some of these questions will be answered as we move forward. So let's dive into our next segment.
So we have a very simple, okay, the mouse is working, very simple sequence of it going, dropping down in an animation, and then audio playing. I'm not going to do the sound effect. Now, we don't just want the text to say go, 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 go. So what I'm going to do is actually use a custom track. So with Timeline, it's built in, it has animation and audio tracks and various things like that, control tracks for particles and things like that already built in. But one of the powerful things, you actually script your own tracks and script your own clips. So what we have here, if I select the countdown text and drag it into the Timeline editor, notice that there's TMP, TextMesh Pro, text switcher. This is very typical for, say, a conversation between two characters where you say at this point, this is the text being displayed, and then this point, this text is being displayed. And this custom track and custom playable that I've made is basically binds to a TextMesh Pro element, and then in the clips, kind of like the animation clip is saying, at this point, this is the animation, at this clip, this is the audio, it's saying at this clip, a certain text element is going to say this instead. So you can type in the string that it's going to say at this point in time. So what I'm going to do is take the countdown text, because that's the text element, the go that we want to sequence, or that I'm going to sequence, drag it into the timeline editor, and I'm going to select TMP text switcher track, which has this new track. If I then right-click inside this area, kind of like where we did right-click, add an audio clip, right-click, add an animation clip, I'm going to add a TMP, TextMesh Pro, text switcher clip, because basically you define the clip, and then it'll add a clip on the end. That's just a timeline thing.
We're working on it.
Clip, yeah. So you can add lots of clips. The default duration of a clip of a custom track is 5 seconds. But what I'm going to do is show you how you can actually take this clip and you can actually extend it and trim it. So you could do that with audio and animation as well, but what I can do is I can then take this clip. You can position it and snap it to different elements. What we can do is actually trim it down.
To be clear, you can change the duration, you can't change the default of 5 seconds, in case that came off as confusing.
Yeah, sorry. So what I could do is I could trim it down to 1 second, or in the inspector with the clip selected, you'll notice that I can set the duration, you can set the end, you can set the ease in, ease out, all sorts of options like that. So I have this clip here. You can even name it. So if I name this to like 3, you'll notice that it'll actually display 3. So you can actually name the custom tracks and name them different things to help you later on in terms of organization. And then in this custom playable, or this custom clip, we have here text, and I can write in here 3 and set the font size. So let's set this to be 150. So notice here, At this point, it will say 3. I'm then going to take this and duplicate it 3 times. So I have this text saying 3, 3, 3. Now, that's not going to be useful for a countdown. So what I'm then going to do is select each clip, change the name of the clip. You don't have to do that, but it keeps things a bit more organized. And then change the text that is then being set at that point. So 3, 2, 1, obviously, if I can count. And then at the end, Mike suggested YOLO yesterday, but if you're a millennial, you could totally do that.
You can do it if you're not. This is America.
Let's go with Go. And then I've also exposed the font size, so I can have 3, 2, 1, go, and then on that last element, or that last clip, set the font size to be 200. So now it'll go 3, 2, 1, go. Now, I could have totally done that via script and written a script that then changes the element and animates it at these certain points, but with Timeline, you can have it more visual, you can orchestrate that all more visually, you can scrub through it and preview
it's also much easier to change.
Much easier to change, so rather than I going into the script and changing, oh, actually, instead of go, it says YOLO and stuff like that, and then jump out, I can then just select the clip and then change the text that's on that particular clip. And then have a sequence 3, 2, 1, go. If I now click play.
It's worth noting that even though it's counting down, you're still able to drive and everything. We're going to control that in the next step where we sequence the whole thing together and turn it into the final product of the game. So right now, even though it's counting down, you can still drive and completely ignore it. But that gets us the sequence that we want.
Now it's actually really difficult to race because you have Go in the way.
It still wants you to go.
Yeah,
I know
I'm going.
It hasn't stopped wanting you to go. All right.
Yeah. So that's that step. So what I did was take the countdown text, drag it into Timeline Editor, and select TMP Text Switcher Track. Let's delete those. So with that text switcher track, right-click inside that track and create a clip. Now, I could adjust the size of the clip, but instead I'm just going to set the duration to be 1, because each of the 3, 2, 1 is 1 second long. Duplicate it 4 times, and then for each one, write the equivalent text. So 3, 2, and the font size, of course, 1, and then go. Cool, which is those steps there.
Okay, great. So we've seen how we can use Timeline not just to sequence animation and audio, but also to modify the properties of a component, right? So now we're starting to see Timeline really being used as a kind of a control tool as opposed to just like an animation or audio playback system. So I feel like this is where things start to get really interesting. Happy to see that some of Mike's jokes have made it past the ruthless razor blades of Nick, our editor. Definitely hashtag save Mike's jokes. And okay, so let's just keep going right away. We are going to continue with Timeline, looking at our intro cutscene.
So we have a very simple, okay, the mouse is working, very simple sequence of it going, dropping down in an animation, and then audio playing. I'm not going to do the sound effect. Now, we don't just want the text to say go, 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 go. So what I'm going to do...
Whoops, that's not it. Hold on a sec. Please stand by. That is not the clip. Okay. I might need to do something a little weird because, okay, just give me 1 sec, sorry. Somehow this got a little messed up. Whoop. There's my video footage. This is, we just saw 12C. Oh, that's the issue. I don't even have a 12C clip. Yeah, I know. Sorry, guys. Okay, I thought that. Let's go.
So we have a very simple, okay, the mouse is working, very simple sequence of it going, dropping down in an animation. Okay, so we're on the final cycle. We finally made it. And we're actually going to sequence the intro cutscene. So we made a very basic timeline, just animating a piece of text, playing some audio, and then changing the text with a custom track. Now what we're going to do is, as I said earlier on, I've already kind of made a half-finished timeline, and we're going to combine these two together. So we're going to have timeline A and timeline B, and timeline A is then going to sequence timeline B. So we're going to piece together this countdown into that intro cutscene of the camera flying around the track. It's quite easy to do, but there's still a couple of caveats and a couple of things I need to point out. So if I now switch back to here. So in my project, underneath in the timelines folder, we had the countdown timeline, which is the one I made, and have the cutscene timeline as well. So this is a timeline already pre-set up with different clips and different tracks and things like that, which you can see very, very soon. And underneath the prefabs folder, in the timeline folder, we had that countdown UI, which is the 3, 2, 1, go, and we also have the cutscene timeline prefab. I'm now going to drag that into my scene. There won't be any noticeable changes, but I'm just going to step through what this cutscene timeline prefab has, which is structured up so just to save time. Has a playable director. Kind of like how the countdown UI had a playable director to play that 3, 2, 1 countdown, we also got one for the cutscene here. It's playing on awake, so it's going to happen at the beginning because it's an intro cutscene. It's also running in game time, and it doesn't loop because we don't want to begin the race and then it keeps looping that same intro cutscene. We want to get to the end and then stop. What I have also here are 3 different camera shots. And each of these, just using empty game objects to hold these camera shots, are different points or different Cinemachine cameras of that intro cutscene. So this first one, if I select it here, you'll notice here that I'm using a Cinemachine virtual camera, pretty much identical to the one that we had, well, not identical, but pretty much the same setup that we had with the ship. But instead of following the ship, it's basically sitting at a static place. And one thing you do with Cinemachine is you can change the priorities of the cameras. So you can set some are more dominant than others and some render before other ones. Or if I click solo, I can then see that this Cinemachine, ignore the UI, but this Cinemachine virtual camera is now looking at the Antigraviator flags, which is subtle advertising. The Antigraviator. There you go, man. Of the flags moving. And the flags are using a shader to move, which we're not in play mode, but it's a pretty cool effect. Also have here a second Cinemachine camera, which looks almost the same, but it's slightly to the side, because over timeline it's going to blend the first camera to the second camera very, very slowly. The next virtual camera is positioned here, and this is a dolly track. So what we have in Cinemachine, if I click the Cinemachine drop down here, you can also create a spline path to have a camera, or also now a not camera, so you can actually have the ship following a spline path, following the dolly spline path as well, and have a camera follow that. So if you remember at the beginning when we showed the end projects of the camera going through the cave and then going into the tunnel, some people were like, oh, I remember that. Some people were like, that was such a long time ago. Like, I don't remember anymore.
If the term dolly doesn't mean anything to you, just think of like a train track or roller coaster that the camera moves on as it looks at stuff, right? So we're just basically setting up a path that the camera will follow.
And if I fly up here, that green line is the dolly track. I've tried to make a very simple one, not too twisty, but this dolly track has a series of waypoints, as you can see here, and each of those waypoints can be grabbed and moved and manipulated. Where you can see here that this track has a series of waypoints. So we have waypoint 0, waypoint 1, and waypoint 2, just making this nice curve. And if I now go down to waypoint 1 and select it, notice that I can then move and manipulate this point, and you see that the spline actually changes. You actually also have the handles as well. So changing the handles will make the camera follow the track in a slightly different way. Now that's going to make the camera go through the track, so I'm going to undo that. And I've tried to set it up very basic so you can actually modify it and tweak it and change that dolly track. And the last shot is just this. It starts at the top. We're going to blend this down into our follow cam. So with all that set up, I'm then going to go back to timeline, click that little selector, which I showed earlier on, and you see where we have the countdown timeline? We now have a cutscene timeline, because remember we have that second playable director. If I now select that, you'll notice that I then have this timeline in play here. This timeline has a couple of tracks you may be familiar with, and a couple that you don't. The first one is an animation track, and this is basically animating the dolly at a certain point. So with these 3 camera shots, the first one being the actual beginning shot of the flags, the second shot is going to be of the camera following that dolly path, and then the third shot is of the camera in a high up position blending into the back of the ship. You can see here you have keyframes because the animation track allows you to actually keyframe on the track. So what we have here is we're animating the actual, and you can see that we actually have a curve here of the camera starting at the start of the dolly path and then animating towards the end. Another track you have here is the Cinemachine track. So when you download Cinemachine, it'll actually already come integrated with a timeline track. And what you can do is have each of these clips, and kind of like how we had the TextMesh Pro clip that changed the text, what each of these clips will do is actually change which virtual camera the main camera wants to use. And what I'm going to do is currently, if I now scrub through this, nothing is actually happening. And that's because the Cinemachine track requires a binding to a Cinemachine brain. So I'm going to bind it to the main camera, which has the Cinemachine brain, which is controlling the camera and what the virtual cameras it's going to use. You notice that as I scrub through, I have a blend between these two virtual cameras here. So we've got this first virtual camera, which is set up here, the second virtual camera, which is set up here. So a very subtle blend between there. Then also have this, ignore the Go in the UI, also have this dolly cam flying through during this clip's duration. And at the end, have this last clip not actually doing anything. So what I want to do is I want to take this clip and actually set it up so that it doesn't just sit there, it blends into that follow virtual camera made pretty much at the beginning of the day. And to do that, it's kind of similar to the audio track and the animation track. I'm going to right-click the Cinemachine track. Okay. Right-click the Cinemachine track. It says add Cinemachine shot clip, not a clip. It will then create a new clip, kind of like TextMesh Pro, Text Switcher, and when we imported the animation and audio. And then in the clips data, clicking that target, we then have all the virtual cameras we can define for this exact shot. And look here, we have the follow cam, because that is a virtual camera we can blend to. And then now, what you'll notice is that as I scrub through, it will pop between the cameras. We don't want it to pop. Instead, I can drag it and actually blend it together like this, and actually have the camera blends from point A to point B. And of course, trim this down so it doesn't keep blending. So here we have this shot here from this bird's eye camera, and then during this blend, it then blends down to that follow camera. So it's a nice transition. So you could set up the dolly cam to then fly around and then blend to the back of the ship. So yeah, we have this very nice blend here. And if I now click play at the beginning, flags are waving. Dolly track is then rolling around. So you can set the roll of the individual points of the dolly track as well. It goes there and hits go. I'm not going to go to play mode because technically that won't work. We could still drive around on the track. But instead, just leave it like that. And then in the last step, we then tie it all together. Actually, if I go into play mode, you can still race the ship around during this cutscene. So you can kind of have the cutscene taking place and see the ship racing around, although it makes the game significantly more difficult to play. So the steps that I did was went to the timeline prefab folder, select the cutscene timeline prefab, dragged it into the scene. You don't have to go through and preview each of the virtual cameras. I've already set them up into different shots. Then on the timeline window, go to the little selector here and switch from Countdown UI. We can always switch back to Countdown UI and modify and change things there. Switch to the cutscene timeline. Set the Cinemachine camera binding to be the main camera, so the brain, the Cinemachine brain that we added to the main camera at the beginning of the day. And then on that Cinemachine track, which will be red, right-click, add Cinemachine shot clip, and then on that clip, point it to the follow camera, and then blend it, and then trim it. We have all the steps on the slides, just like so.
Okay, cool. So we've seen the steps that we need to get our intro cutscene going. Obviously, we're not building the entire thing on the stream because it would take a long time, but we've seen kind of some of the highlights. And what we're going to look at next is how we're going to integrate that with the game manager so that the players can't fly around while we are waiting for the cutscene to complete. So let's just jump right into that, and then we'll continue the discussion in the chat.
So, the next step. Some people have actually asked me, so what do these bottom two tracks do? This one that says none game object, and it's green, and it's got a tick. You can probably have a very good guess what that does. This one called a control track, which is a bit more ambiguous in what it does and what it actually controls, and what these clips say. So these are two built-in tracks into Timeline. The first one, the green one, is an activation track. It's very, very simple in that you bind it to an object, and when you have a clip, it will basically turn off the object, and when you reach the clip, it will turn it on, and then for the duration it will be on, and then it will turn it off. So a good example of this is, let's say, a cutscene, and a dragon flies over, and then you want to appear the dragon's name underneath, like a Zelda boss or something like that. You can use the activation track to say, turn on this UI for this duration, and then turn it off at the end. So you can use it to turn on and off different objects. The activation track, you're setting the active state of the object. The second one is a control track. This is a bit more ambiguous. So the control track doesn't have a binding, but on the clip, it's got a whole, on the clip, it's got a whole load of different settings, such as post-playback and particles and stuff like this. And the control track's purpose is to basically sequence anything that happens over time. So one being a particle system. So if you wanted, let's say, a lightning strike to take place, and you want to scrub through that lightning strike, you can create a control track, bind it to the particle system, and then you can position that lightning strike on the timeline. So say at this point, a lightning strike will take place, because it's something that happens over time. And of course, the duration matters as well, because you can change the length of each of the clips. Another thing that the control track can do is actually can control, over time, another timeline. So we have here this intro cutscene where the camera flies through and does different things. And we have this other timeline that goes 3, 2, 1, go. And some people who have gone into play mode will actually notice that both these things play exactly the same time. So you'll see here, it's counting down 3, 2, 1, go. And you're like, oh, wow, OK, so I should be racing whilst this dolly track is playing. And then I can actually still drive the car around. Like, yeah. Now, you obviously don't want that to happen. You want this intro cutscene to be nice camera shot, nice little fly through, nice little pan down. And then, in this clip here, this to be the 3, 2, 1, go. So we're not nesting it. We're not nesting a timeline, so another timeline. We're kind of saying, at this point, play this other timeline at this point. It's generally good practice to break your timelines into lots of little timelines. And if you use After Effects, has anyone here used After Effects a lot? It's kind of like having a composition. You put a composition sequenced by another composition as well. You can break it into little chunks, which is kind of what we've done. Now, if I was to select this control playable asset, you'll notice here that in the clip, it says, what is the source game object? This could be a particle system. This could be another timeline. It could be anything that happens over time. I'm going to select the target. Then in here, we have assets and scene. So we have this 3, 2, 1 countdown is an object in our scene. So I'll select scene. Now, because we can select any game object, I then have to filter it down.
This is a common gotcha here. If you don't click over to scene and you type countdown under assets, you're going to be grabbing the prefab that's in your project folder. It's not going to work. And you're going to wonder why, because it looks like you have countdown UI there. So you have to be sure you grab the one in the scene. If you don't trust yourself to click that scene tab first, just drag the one from your scene onto there. But yeah, definitely be sure you click the scene one and not the one that's in your assets folder.
Remember that you have that countdown UI prefab, and it's not going to sequence that because it's just an asset in your project folder, not actually in your scene. So click countdown UI. Now, if I scrub through, OK, we still have the lap times, but don't worry about that, because remember that script clears those and sets the string to null. Then as we get to this point, hey, look, we have that 3, 2, 1, go countdown. And if I was to move this, so I drag this here, you could actually set it up. So you can actually sequence and position this 3, 2, 1, go. You could have another cutscene that takes place like in another level with different dolly tracks and embed that 3, 2, 1, go there. So you have that same one countdown, but across multiple scenes, multiple timelines. And this is where it gets a little Inception-y, I'll be honest. You have timelines within timelines within timelines within timelines.
We must go deeper.
Yes. So we still have that 3, 2, 1, go. And if I went into play mode, I could still drive the ship around. And remember, Mike said at the beginning, we had the game manager, the coroutine, which initializes itself and then plays. Well, we don't want the player to start driving around, at the beginning of the game during this intro cutscene. We want it to turn on at certain points. So with this activation track, we can then set the binding of this activation track to be, and again, in the scene, the game manager. And as I scrub through here, you'll probably notice here that the game manager is now turned off. It's a little bit faint, but you can see it doesn't have the same sort of color blue. It's kind of like faded out blue. And then when I scrub and get to that activation clip, it's then going to turn on that game manager and initialize the player's input. And the reason why we do it at this point here is because in a typical racing game, we don't wait until go fades out and then go. It goes 3, 2, 1, and then on go, then the race begins. So you see 3, 2, 1, and then I've already lined this up at this point. Go. You can see that this clip is already at that exact point for go, and then the race begins. So it's a very simple step. There's 2 things. So if I now show you kind of the end thing with no audio.
I believe they just have it muted up there.
Okay, they didn't like the song. That's fine.
It's all right.
Oh, thank you. So we have the intro cutscene showing off the environment, typical to a racing game. And at this point, and again, I can try and hit the arrow keys and I can't drive. And notice that the game manager also handles the lap time. And of course, 1.6 seconds, I beat the time again.
Fantastic.
And then we have that cutscene there.
It kind of seems silly that I took 27 seconds when you did it in 1.6.
Who's to say? Cool. And you can race around, and then when it reloads the scene, it will reload that same intro cutscene timeline. So, very simple. On this activation track, which is the one with the green tick, set the game manager. That's the scene game manager, not the asset prefab game manager. And then on the control track, on the clip, set the countdown UI, and that's the scene countdown UI, not the asset countdown UI. It's literally 2 things. Now, you could position things around, but those are the only 2 things that you have to set.
Okay, great. So now just about the last steps, I think we're reaching the end here, are to set the control clip source game object to the countdown UI and set the activation tracks binding to the game manager. So Oscar Russo, Oscar was asking about how we could use this potentially for some other applications, and the fact that you can activate and deactivate game objects, right, means that you could do a lot. Along with obviously the animation and the music capability. So I'm just going to jump us into our last clip, and then we'll have a little chat at the end.
This is the completion of the day, so thank you all very much. If you want to try this out, if you want to make a build of this, simply go to File, Build Settings, and then Build and Run. And that will create a build for either your Mac or your PC that you can then play. It's a fully built version of the game, so definitely check that out. We do want to thank very much the folks from Cybernetic Walrus for the assets from this game, Antigraviator. So thank you all very, very much. Definitely check them out at the Made with Unity Expo. So they got their booth there. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so very much. Really do appreciate it. Without them, this game would look like total garbage, trust me. Luckily it does not. So as you complete the last step here, I know a lot of you are still working. And then if you have questions, we've got some mics set up here, so feel free to come on up and ask some questions too. We're happy to answer those. And then otherwise, we're gonna wrap it up, and you guys have made it to the very end. So congratulations.
Hey, the Text Mesh Pro switching clip has a hard text input. Is there any way to get a variable, or is there a plan to one day make that possibly a variable, dynamic variable input.
Andy's the one who wrote that. Andy, you want to answer that? He asked about TextMesh Pro, the clip that you wrote. Basically, right now you type in the value that you want there, but is there any way to make that dynamic?
Dynamic in which way?
Say the text could say off or it could say on, depending on some other background thing that's happening.
Oh, okay. So like, another example is player types in their name and it says hello Mike or hello Andy or whatever it may be. So this is more of a general timeline thing, but all of those clip data like TextMesh Pro size, audio clip that you play, all that stuff can be scripted and modified actually. So you could actually have a script that says go to this specific clip in timeline and change it to say instead of hello placeholder, it says hello Mike because someone input Mike. Again, to pimp it out, Chiro's talk goes into scripting for timelines. He's actually going to show a couple of examples. I'm not sure exactly this example. I can't actually see him. But his talk is going to go into that. So you can programmatically bind things at runtime, which is actually what the enhanced version does. And you can also change all those values dynamically as well. So the editor is just, you type it in like anything, but you can change all that via script.
Thanks.
All right, so real quick, doesn't seem to be have any questions right now. We want to show you real quick here what the other version of the project is. So here I have what we're calling the enhanced version, and we've got a couple controllers here. So Andy and I are going to race to sort of settle this one. And what's cool is we're going to see a few different things. So we're going to see how we can basically dynamically bind some timeline stuff, how it's going to go from one camera down into two as the race is going to start. And it has support for two controllers here. So we can see there, now it's gone into each one there. And we'll race. I'm the one on the right. And we'll see.
You've definitely rigged your ship too faster.
I have not done any such thing.
Yeah, look at that.
It helps if you don't hit the wall. Generally speaking, I mean, I'm no expert, but.
Yeah, I can't catch up now.
You, not with that attitude. Oh man, I'm way ahead of you.
Can you please crash to make it?
You know, sometimes you just almost get too good at something. And it just, I don't know, takes the thrill out of the hunt.
It makes it look like it's a one-player game. If you slow down a little bit, you can see the other ships racing on the track.
Well, I can see you. I just see the back of you as I'm about to pass you again. Physical wounds heal, mental ones don't. Oh, that's just devastating. We're recording this too.
I know.
So this is just, it's gonna live forever. Oh, man.
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously the trial run. We have to do the proper one next.
Oh. And, oh, so good.
I definitely think there was cheating in that.
So good. Oh. It's like a great home-cooked meal. It just warms you inside. So, anyone want to try?
Can someone turn off his mic, please?
Anyone want to give it a whirl? Thank you. You guys, how about you guys? You guys want to play?
Oh, the actual engine.
No, come on. No, I think you two should race each other. I think, all right. So we're going to get the Antigraviator folks up here. Cybernetic Walrus, we're going to let them do this. So gas, reverse, brake, left, right. So gas, reverse, brake, left, right. Cool?
Well, those are different than our controls.
I know. We wanted to make it a little bit different. That first curve's rough.
realize if player 2 wins, then your ship's definitely rigged.
Fair enough. Yeah, the walls are closer on for player 1. It's a very cheap trick there. We still have 10 more minutes if anyone else would like to come up and play, or if anyone else has any other questions or anything else we can help with. Otherwise, we're doing talks all week. Come check us out. We've got an Ask the Experts booth, and we'll just be around. You almost caught up to him. There you go. The Cybernetic champion. Good job, guys. Thanks. Fantastic. How about a round of applause for the event staff who ran this today, which is awesome. Thank you very much, guys. Great job.
You want to go?
All right, enjoy the rest of your night. Cheers.
Okay, awesome. So thank you guys so much for joining us for the series. We had a blast being here with you guys. Thanks again to Mike Cook from Cybernetic Walrus, developers of Antigraviator, for joining us live. Super, super fun having you here. Highly recommend you guys go to antigraviator.com and sign up for their mailing list. And you can also wishlist the game on Steam. There are links to do that in the central chat. I'll paste them again in the side chat so you don't have to scroll back up. And be sure to check us out next week. We'll be here on Wednesday next week for the 2D game kit session with Aurora Demopoulos. We will be doing more live training day events at upcoming Unite conferences. So if you want to be part of something like this live over the course of a day, I think Mike Geig will be doing the one this year. Mike, maybe you can speak to that in the chat. I don't think anything is announced yet, but I believe we're doing one this year. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, we're here every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. GMT doing these live sessions, so we love to see you here. We're going to be on Connect moving forward. We're saying goodbye to Twitch. We had a lot of great years over there, but we're moving over to our own platform because we feel like we can provide a better experience here. And we hope you agree. Obviously, it's early days over here, so we're taking feedback. If there's anything we can do to improve the experience, we would love to hear that from you guys. Yes, this Connect page, actually, that's a good question. The Connect page will remain, I think, to the end of the event. I don't know if the chat channel will remain open. I think it will actually close at the end of the event in like an hour or two. So yeah, if there's any information that you want from the chat, yeah, if you want to keep the comments, yeah, you might want to copy paste them if there's any key information there that you want to preserve. Yeah, it's not, the locations for the upcoming Unites are not announced yet, but they are happening. So we would love to see you there. I know that Mike and I will also be at the Game Developers Conference at GDC this year in San Francisco. And we'll be out and about. Unity is not having a booth at GDC this year, which is an interesting development. Instead, we're going to be inviting people to our office, which is like a block away from Moscone, and is like a nice big space. So we'll be having sessions at the office. I think Mike is going to deliver some kind of a talk. I know some of the other Evangelists team are going to be delivering some talks there. So if you're going to be at GDC, we would love to see you there at the Unity office. We'll be out and walking around. So, you know, if you're there, maybe hit us up on Twitter and we can meet up in person. I don't know, actually, how many of you guys in the chat are planning to go to GDC? Maybe we could do a live session meetup at GDC. That might be kind of fun. Just meet up at the Unity office or somewhere and meet in real life. Let me know. And yeah, so just thanks so much for being here. We'll take some questions from the chat. Let me take a look at what we. Oh, and a question for you guys. What do you think of this format of, you know, streaming longer chunks of pre-recorded video and then typing in the chat as it goes? Do you guys enjoy that as a format? Obviously, we're not going to stop doing the kind of live sessions where I'm typing stuff on the stream, but this does allow us to do a lot more, and that's part of, you know, going to this weekly frequency we used to do every 2 weeks. Doing them once a week, doing these pre-recorded things allows us to bring you more content. But what do you think about the format? Do you think it's a good experience? Do you like the style of the presentation? Let me know in the chat. I'm kind of curious. All right, let me read the comments here and see what we got. Cool. Hey, thanks again, Mike Cook. Really appreciate you being here. Glad you learned something from it as well. I know I learned some stuff from watching this. A lot of new features here. I mean, I try to keep on top of all the latest tech, but of course, new stuff is always coming out, so it's always fun to see what Mike and Andy are doing with it. Yeah, right on. Thanks to everybody saying thanks. Awesome. Glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, GM Liquid Media, try the scriptable object thing out. The only thing is that you can't persist data between runs with the scriptable objects. So you would probably, if you wanted to have it like be there when the game started again, you would want to write it to a JSON file or something. And we covered that in our quiz game live training, serializing and deserializing JSON. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dirk. Thank you, Pascal. Awesome. Thanks, Sinal. Appreciate it. Final question. Can I create timelines, add their tracks and content, and play them only by using scripts? I actually don't know the answer to that. I would hope so, but because it's an asset creation process, I believe that you should be able to do it. It's certainly from an editor script. I don't know about a gameplay script. Maybe Mike can answer that question for Johan. Thanks, Jacob Hochstrasser, for joining us, and I'm glad to hear you had a great experience. Appreciate that. Cool. Philip says the format was great. Nice. Glad to hear it. Cool. Maxie as well. Philip as well. Nice. Michelle says that they like the format too. Good. Cool. That's good. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, I like the format. I think it's fun. It's fun for me because I get to interact with the chat more. Because the other times I'm like really sitting there trying to bang through my demo, you know, and it's like a little more stressful for me. So this is like kind of relaxed. I can eat some snacks, talk to the chat. This is easy mode for me. But I think it's kind of fun. Cool. Well, I'm glad to hear you guys enjoying that. Yeah, being able to answer the questions in the chat, right? Because I feel like the point of this live thing is that what makes it unique being live as opposed to just watching on YouTube is that we can interact, right? So actually doing the pre-record kind of gives us more time to amp up that interaction piece. So it's funny, even though it's like less technically live, and then obviously we're interacting live on the mic here, right? But like since the demo is less live, but it actually gives us more time for what is kind of unique about the format, which is the interaction. So we're working on it. We're figuring it out. Yeah, I feel like it makes it more interactive too, Stephen. Nice. Appreciate that. Cool. Craig, glad you joined us for the first time. Craig Medlock, welcome aboard, man. We do these a lot, and we got a lot of great regulars who've been with us for a while, and it's always great to see new people. Join the community. Pale Cinder asks, what pass do I need if I want to just go for Unity sessions? You do not need a pass to come to the Unity office. No GDC badge required to come to the Unity office. But obviously I feel like that might be a little controversial with, with the GDC folks, but we are, of course, a platinum supporter of GDC. as a sponsor, you know, so we're totally committed to GDC and making it a great event. But also, yeah, that is kind of a cool thing to open it up a little more to the public. You do not have to have a badge to come to the Unity office and join the sessions there. So that's kind of cool. Nice. Yeah, all right, great. +1 for the format from Gideon. Nice, nice. Cool. Dakota, thank you. Yeah, awesome, awesome. Yeah, oh man, the two monitor thing, 2 monitors is really optimal for this kind of setup, right? So you can have the training on one side and then the editor, if you're following along or if you're taking notes or whatever, on another. I gotta say, I feel like 2 monitors for game dev is really advantageous. But of course, some folks are on laptops and different places, so it's not, and I think mobile is still like kind of a challenge for Connect. So we're working on it. We're working on getting a better, especially with the way the video is displayed, we're definitely working on it. Nice. Biddy says, this is the best way to have a tutorial. Appreciate that. Yeah, Michelle, I agree. 2 monitors are kind of mandatory. Obviously, not everybody has the money for 2 monitors or the space or whatever, but it's definitely like if you can get a second monitor for cheap, it adds a lot to the setup. Nice. Yeah, exactly. 1 for chat, 1 for stream. Yeah, totally, totally. I mean, luckily nowadays monitors are cheaper, right, than they have been in the past. So hopefully you live somewhere where it's easy to get a cheap monitor. Okay, nice, GM Liquid Media. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm like reading back in the chat. Yeah, I think the JSON is going to be the way. I don't think Cinemachine does. It can persist changes from play mode in the editor, but I don't think it does like any kind of recording of like movement. Awesome. Philip, yeah, so we're doing a pre-recorded. Philip says, I'm looking forward to the new job system in this format. We're doing a pre-recorded short video, like a 2 to 4 minute video for YouTube next Monday that we're actually working very hard on right now behind the scenes. Oh no, Tuesday I think it's going to come out, but early next week. It's going to be like a job system overview. And then, yes, I do want to do a longer session on the job system. I got to figure out who to get for that, because I confess I am not fully up on all the new way of writing jobified code yet. That's something I really need to study. But yeah, there's a ton of really cool performance possibilities coming with the new tech, with the job system, the entity component system, and also the new math-optimized compiler, which I think all are going to work together in a really cool way and be super powerful and awesome. Dan Hart, first timer, nice. Glad you could join us and glad you enjoyed it. Thanks so much. Yeah, so yeah, as Daniel Kupfer says, the format is amazing, but I think it's also tons of work to prepare such a great project always. Oh, heck yes. I know that Andy and Mike spent a ton of time in preparing this presentation, right? And this was presented to a live audience. This was like a day-long event that people paid admission for to get the training, right? But then because, you know, at Unity, we're all about democratization, once we've done the event and the people have gotten the benefit from it, we want to make sure that we bring it forward to the wider community, right? And so we distribute the videos after the fact for free. And this is kind of our way of like doing a nice little release event for the videos as opposed to just like sticking them up on YouTube. So that's kind of the format here. But yeah, we're not going to be doing these more than, you know, once or twice a year in terms of this level of content and quality. Because yeah, it is a huge project to prepare and a ton of work. But I'm glad to hear you enjoyed it. Cool. Carlos says he learned a lot and it was super fun. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Even on a laptop, having a second screen hooked up, right, is a huge benefit. Man, Mike's got 4 monitors. Damn, Mike. Fancy. I've only got 2 monitors here. I'm at the Unity office in Berlin. They're big monitors, though, so yeah. Networking a wall of monitors, GM Liquid Media, hot dog. All right, thanks again to Mike Cook for joining us. Big round of applause for him. Super fun having you here. Check out Antigraviator. Big thanks to the whole team at Cybernetic Walrus. And hopefully we'll be seeing much more of them in the future in their game. And check them out at GDC or South by Southwest. And say hi, as Mike says. Thanks again, Mike. Peter says, I can't even live without a second monitor. I hear you. Well, you get used to it, right? You really get used to having 2 monitors, and that feels really weird having 1. Mike says, never be afraid of monitor superiority. Oh, nice. Mike's going to cover job system at GDC too. Sweet. Oh, actually, I want to drop in for that presentation. Nice. Philip says, could you bring us any insights into the upcoming component system? I'm downloading each beta version, but there's still almost nothing on that. Yeah, it's new, man. We are starting to bring out some information around it. The best places to look, Joachim, our CTO and founder, has a talk. There's like two 1-hour-long talks that he gave where he shows some code and stuff. And actually, we're about to release a video on Tuesday about it, and there will be some resources there. Actually, here I can link. Let me find them. Stella Canifax, who works at Unity, she made a project called the Job System Cookbook, which is on GitHub. Here it is. Here's her GitHub page. Yeah, Job System Cookbook, which has some great little examples in there that you guys can check out if you're interested in learning about the job system. And we're going to be showing some examples from that in the video and linking to it as well. All right. Yeah, so folks asking about the job system. So rather than me giving an explanation of it now, check back on the Unity YouTube on Tuesday, because we have actually a video that tries to explain it in like a nice 2 to 4 minute concise format with some footage of some projects and stuff. Well, Phillips, 1 sentence. Incoming access for transform and raycasts from other built-in multi-thread system. That's not a bad description. It's basically a way of parallelizing user scripts and using multiple cores. It's like the very short version. You're getting lots of performance. Woohoo, says Mike. Thanks, Pale Cinder. Awesome. Glad you enjoyed it. Thanks, Armin. Would love to see you again on here. Thanks, Patrice, Tobias. Tobias is asking if there's a mobile app for Unity Connect. There is not, but watch this space, because we are hoping to get something out. I don't know if it'll cover the video streaming, but we're looking to get something out so that you can join our in-person events via Connect and check in via the app. I don't know. Actually, I don't know if that's official or what the official plans are for it. So maybe forget that information. But I think we're working on something. Yes. Okay. Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Johan. Pascal. Okay, Mike. Thanks for hanging with us. We'll see you soon. Thanks, Greg. Pascal asks, will the job system be usable in complete projects in 2018 or still in preview? It will be usable just with a limited functionality, I think is the best way to explain it. Like right now, I think you can just do, there's like a transform access. Like you can't access every part of the engine from jobs yet, and that's going to be like a slow process of adding more and more integration with the job system. So right now you need to calculate your data in your jobs and then bring it back and operate on it in the, in the next frame. Whoops, oh my gosh, wow, so much chat going past. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I mean, I would also say that probably a phone a phone is not the optimal experience for this type of thing, right? Obviously, if you're just on the bus or whatever, and that's the only way you can access it, we'd love to have you here on your phone, but this is the kind of thing that is probably a sitting at the computer experience for the best, best results. Of course, your mileage may vary. Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Okay, I'm going to start to wrap up myself because it's pushing 11 o'clock here in Berlin, Germany. My name is Matt Schell. I'm an online evangelist here at Unity. You can follow me on Twitter at @MattMirrorfish. I'm on there all the time. Make sure you check out the other events we've got coming up on Connect. And I look forward to seeing you guys again. Thanks so much. Bye.